Today, we have with us Scarlett Heinbuch, an author, speaker, healer, and someone who cares passionately about our world and its people. Scarlett, thank you so much for taking the time to be here with us today.
Thank you, Vera. I'm really excited to be here.
We're so excited to have you. And Scarlett, you are a very special person, anyways, but insofar, most special as you have had a shared death experience, something which is very rare. And Dr. Raymond Moody, in his book Glimpses of Eternity, calls shared death experiences one of the strongest indicators that consciousness may actually survive death. So your story has touched many people, and that's why I'm really honored to have you here. And before we get into deeper questions, could you tell us who you were back then and what led up to your experience and what exactly happened?
Thank you. Wow. Well, there's a lot that led up to this experience, and I do want to acknowledge that it was Raymond Moody's terms of shared death experience when he came up with that really helped me to fine tune our experience that we'll get into. But basically, what I tell people when they ask, well, how did all of this happen? When I was 4 years old, and we're talking in the early 1960s, I had a drowning incident. And in that time, at 4 years old, you really don't know a sense of before and after. But what had happened was it was a summer day. I was in this a neighborhood swimming pool with my mother. There were a lot of children there. It was a hot day. My sister was in the pool with me. My brother was over in the kiddie pool, and my mother, who is a nurse, was there keeping an eye on all of us from my watching my brother over there, my sister and I. And we had been warned to stay in the shallow end of the pool because it kind of slopes down to the deeper end, which went down to 6 feet. So my sister and I were in the two feet end, and I was just bobbing up and down. And I didn't realize as I bobbed down, I was going backward. And then I reached the point where my feet did not hit the bottom. And in panic, I gulped water. Well, I still couldn't get any traction, and I continued to gulp water, and then I lost consciousness. Then, here's the thing. I apparently drowned, and I was on the bottom of the pool, but I was on the outside upper corner of the pool looking down at my body in the bottom of the pool. So I recognize, I mean, it's not like you have time to process any of these things. You're just experiencing. But I knew that that was me too, that was me outside on the edge of this pool watching and seeing my body on the bottom. And so how could that be? So was I both? I mean, these aren't questions that I had at the time, but I just accepted it as normal that, oh, okay, I've drowned and there I am, but here I am too. But my mother then got me out of the pool, and as a nurse, she knew what to do to revive me. And she later told me that, you were blue and you weren't breathing. And she said for a while you weren't with us. So I knew that I had drowned. And but what was interesting, Vera, is being in that space of being hovering outside of my body. I was in a place of such love, such incredible peace, such bliss. And I talk about this in the book I wrote, that I had grown up in an alcoholic home. So it wasn't very blissful nor peaceful, and it was hard. And so as a young child, it was experiencing this sense of incredible peace. I didn't want to leave it. But I did feel my mother's feelings, and my awareness was so expanded, and I felt her fear and her shame, her grief, her guilt. And I just knew that I had a choice. I didn't have to come back, but I knew if I didn't, my mother would carry this with her for the rest of her life. And I loved her so much that I didn't want that for her. And I knew that this life journey was not going to be easy. I just knew all these things. It's hard to describe this knowing because it's like there's an entire download. But as much as my 4-year-old brain could process information that is beyond my age, there was a timelessness to this. So I made the choice to come back. And that was in a time when we didn't have terms like even near-death experience. There wasn't anything to call it. So I never questioned that there was an ability that there was something outside of my body, that this incredible love existed. What I didn't understand was when I came back, having all this knowingness, how I was going to survive in this world. because this world was jarring. It was crude. It was not very loving. It was harsh. And I came back even more sensitized than I was. But again, just accepting this is another day of experience in my young life. So this is what happened, and there you go. So as I went through this experience and trying to understand what to make of it, I just knew again that there was an incredible love. What I didn't realize was that this doorway to the other side stayed open. And so I didn't realize too that that also could open up things that weren't love and great energy. So the years continued on, and I began to have experiences that I couldn't explain, where I would see what we now would call spirits, but I didn't have names necessarily for these things. I just accepted. I had a lot of out of body experiences where I would feel myself floating at my grandmother's house. And so I'd be floating down the stairs at night. I'd be floating out of the house. Again, these aren't things where we had language, and I didn't know how to describe what had happened. I just accepted it. But I knew things about people. I knew what would happen. I knew sometimes when people would die to the minute. And I knew this with my grandfather. And I was able to tell my mother when he was ready to pass years later, I said, Mama, he's going to pass away at 11, I think at 17 or whatever time I said that night. And he did to the minute. And it was interesting because his car was parked outside and the horn on his car went off at the time of his death. And so I felt that was his way of just saying goodbye. And he just left very peacefully. So there were a lot of things happen that were also very frightening because, again, as a young child, when you're seeing spirits or things that are frightening, who do you talk to? And so I became very shy, almost painfully shy and quiet, because I realized that when I tried to talk about these things, people treated me like I was weird or strange or crazy or that odd child. But interestingly, adults would like to sit next to me and ask me questions about their lives. So because I knew things, and I couldn't tell you how I knew, it was just knowing. It was just truth. And these things would generally happen. For example, my friend's mother wanted to sit with me one day, and she said that they were getting ready to move to another state. And I said, oh, okay. And I said, are you going to stay there after your divorce? And she looked at me so shocked. And she said, well, I'm not getting a divorce. Why would you say that? And I said, oh, but you are. And again, being a young child, I didn't think that there was anything wrong in telling her the truth, but she did not like my statement. So they moved. Later, I learned that they did indeed get a divorce. And, it just felt like this was who I was. But again, I didn't feel accepted in the world. But one of the things I did do was try to make sense of these things. I began to research on my own, and in the mid 70s, I was volunteering at a after school center and also a crisis center, and I went through the adult training because one of the things I'd always wanted to do from that experience was to help people, to help ease suffering, to help people. And I thought by being honest was being helpful too. But when people had negative reactions, I realized that may not be helpful. Maybe some people didn't want the truth or didn't want to know what was going to happen at times. So I had to learn social cues and nuances that just differed from what I knew to be true. And understand the complexities of how humans operate in this world, because they're very complex people, and they're not plugged in often to the truth or their emotions around it. And that's why I was always so surprised when people would just lie and make up things or be dishonest in relationships or cheat or steal. I was like, I don't understand these behaviors. Why do people do these things? Don't they know that there's love? Don't they know that there's connection? Don't they know if they harm another person, they're harming their own spirit too? Don't they know we're all connected? These were things that I knew. So it was just puzzling to me that people would go against themselves by harming anybody. It didn't ever make any sense. And I always believed that love was such a powerful force. Why couldn't people just love each other? Why did they separate? Why were there any kind of isms? Why were there any kind of discrepancies and disagreements? And why couldn't this person's religion or that person's belief, why couldn't we accept everyone had a right to understand their pathway? And these are questions I still struggle with today. But anyway, these were the types of things that I struggled with as a young child, a teenager, trying to make sense of the world. But at that time, in the mid 70s, at this crisis center, there was a man there who was a retired physicist from Dahlgren in Virginia. And he had studied the Stanford University. They were doing a lot of work in remote viewing. So he thought that was really fascinating. And he wanted to try some experiments because I had talked to him a bit about what I experienced. And so I trusted him and felt he was a father figure. He's a very, very kind, very smart man. And I just genuinely liked him and felt he was a good soul. And so we did some remote viewing experiments, and I found that that's not how things worked for me. When I
Mhm.
was trying to focus on something, it just didn't work. It seemed like I got in my own way. And I'm not much of an artist, so I couldn't draw things like he would drive somewhere, try to see it, and send me the image. But where I was helpful were contacting children who had run away. And their parents would come to the center and say, hey, is there some way to get in touch with these children or just alert that there have been some runaways? So what I would do is I'd sit in quiet and I would try to contact the person who had run away and say, are you okay? Know you're loved. Maybe you could call your parents. And it was interesting. Things would happen soon after where the phone calls would come. Now, you could say, well, maybe that's coincidental, but it happened consistently
Mhm.
with each time, with each session. The call would come that night or the next day. So I thought, well, maybe there is some sort of nudge to the universe when you let people know that they're loved and missed and cared for. And in some cases, children ran away and they weren't loved and cared for, and that's why they ran away. But they still needed some support because they might have been in even worse condition, but they didn't know how to reach out. So these are ways that I thought I could be useful and helpful to others and maybe use whatever this kind of thing, gift, experience, or ability I had to be out of my mind's comfort zone and try to reach another person who might be in trouble.
How did this increased sensitivity that you had lead up to an actual shared death experience? So I understand how your life was already quite different, right, from an ordinary life after this first experience you had. But what happened then?
Well, the years rolled by. I ended up having two sons, and both of my sons had disabilities. My oldest son had severe ADHD and learning disabilities, and my youngest son had epilepsy. And so, as a mother, I wanted to fix these things. I wanted to heal my sons. So, I ended up taking several years of Reiki training. Plus, my mother, as I mentioned, was a nurse, and she had trained in the Dolores Krieger nursing model here in the United States called therapeutic touch. So it's all energy work. So she had shown me that, and Reiki was a medical model. It was anybody could do it. And so I thought, well, working in the body's energy field might help soothe my sons, might help them relax, might de-stress when they're having problems. And so I ended up doing the Reiki. I ended up also going to back to school. I had dropped out on my first go round, and I ended up getting my doctorate in public policy and administration and my master's degree in public health because I wanted to see how we could use these, what formalize my knowledge. At that point, I'd done a huge amount of research into natural foods, medicines, which Germany does a lot of with the German Commission e-monograph series. I'd written about that. I was always very fascinated about natural medicine. And and looking at the body and the brain from a different perspective, that essential fatty acids, which this was back in early 90s when I was doing this research, and now we all have heard of fish oil and oils, but this was me being able to put that out in my research. And in public policy, I also felt that children needed better care. And so I also was looking into that, and but I ended up going in a very different direction because also at that time, I will say that I was having what I experienced a time of depression and just a very overwhelming period in my life where I was struggling being a single parent with my children's disabilities, feeling very stressed about our financial situation. I had left my job to go to school. I had gotten a full scholarship and a stipend, but money was tight. And I felt like what I was doing was drinking wine at night with dinner, and I was felt like I was drinking too much. And I concerned myself with that. Having grown up in an alcoholic home, I was like, I don't want to go down this road. Am I at risk? And so I had never had a ticket or lost anything from it, but I was worried. So I'd gone to some Alcoholics Anonymous meetings, but I'd stopped going because I was busy with school. Well, I had kept in touch with some folks, and what had happened was they told me about this man that had come from the West Coast and here and had ended up here in the Richmond, Virginia area, and that he was just a super nice man. He'd just come to work on a contract and gotten desperately ill, and no one knew what had happened, but he was in the intensive care unit now at a local Catholic hospital, St. Mary's in Richmond. And he'd been in there for weeks in an unresponsive coma, that his lungs had shut down. He was in full respiratory arrest. He was on a breathing machine to keep him alive. One of his lungs had collapsed. They had a chest tube. He had double pneumonia. Then he had sepsis. Then he had blood clots. And then his kidneys also at the same time had shut down and then had gone into complete failure. And finally, after weeks of being in an unresponsive coma, also his heart now had gone out of rhythm, so he was having heart distress. So he was in the cardiac care intensive care unit, and he was dying. He was not getting enough oxygen, so now they suspected brain injury. And he had an illness at the time called Wegener's granulomatosis. And that means little nodules get into the organs. It's a very rare form of vasculitis, maybe 500 cases a year back then. And it creates scar tissue on the kidneys and in the body, and just is devastating. They treat it like with anti-cancer drugs, but it used to be fatal back in the 70s when it was first identified. Well, anyway, they had identified it, but he did not respond to the treatment protocol, and at that point, everything had shut down. The kidneys were not responding, was on daily dialysis, and long story short, his mother was called for the third time, and this day in September, she was told to fly from San Francisco to come out and say goodbye. He wasn't going to survive. So, as it happens, as destiny leaves, a friend of mine called me and said that she was going to go to that meeting that I used to go to, which apparently he had belonged to, but I had never met him. And she was picking up her celebration of 20 years and asked me if I would come. So I came, and that's where I met the man, and his name is David. His mother was there. And she came to say thank you to everybody for the love and care that they'd given her son and the sense of community. And people were standing around crying. And I thought, oh my gosh. And she explained how she had just left the hospital. This was a 7:30 meeting, and that she had signed the funeral directives and that he was not going to make it. And something about her, Vera, just touched my heart, because I guess having experienced what my mother felt at my potential leaving, there's never an age that's appropriate to lose your child, ever. And her son was 41 years old, or 42 at the time. And it was just, but she wasn't crying. She was very stoic and very accepting. She was just grateful, and that her son had had this experience of being in recovery, having such a group and a wonderful group. And so, one of those things, again, where the head doesn't quite match what the mouth says. At the end of this meeting, what I went up to her to say, I thought I was going to tell her how sorry I was, but what came out of my mouth was, I don't think you should give up hope yet. And the minute those words came out of my mouth, my mind kicked into gear thinking, what am I saying? Why this woman must know that there's no way I can, help her son, or why am I saying this? She's already said he's not going to make it. So what I did say was, I mean, I can't say that I can really help her or anything, but what I can do is maybe go see her son if she would like me to, and maybe pray with him because I'd been on a prayer team at the church I was attending at the time. And because I'd had my own near death experience, I wasn't afraid of people dying around me. And I felt that maybe I could comfort him if he was going to go. So, because he was in the ICU, she'd have to give me permission. I explained I did Reiki. She shared with me that he is Jewish, and and I said, well, that's fine. It's not going to affect anything that I do. This is not a religious thing. And so I went the next day, and I didn't know if he would even make it that night. But I'd said my prayers that night. I was like, if I'm supposed to go help this man, then show me why I've even said this. What can I possibly do? And if he's still alive, I'll take that as a nudge from the universe that I am to go. So I went. The next day, I was teaching a class, a marriage and family relationships class at the university as an adjunct, while I was also still doing my teaching assistantship and my coursework. And I got to the hospital, and he was still alive. And they let me back in his room, and I explained I was there to do some Reiki work, and they were very cautious about, well, what is that, and what are you going to do? And the nurse stayed right outside his room. But mother had always told me that even when people are unconscious or in a coma, to talk to them like they're awake. So that's what I did. I introduced myself. He didn't know me. I was a complete stranger to him as he was to me. So I told him my name. I told him while I was there that I had met his mother the night before, and that I'd met his friends who all seemed to really love and care for him, and that I was here to offer some Reiki healing energy work that was fully respectful of anyone's religion if he would like. But I would need his permission because it was his healing journey, not mine. And he had every right to say no or to give permission. And even though he couldn't talk, I would wait and listen. And I would be able to hear him with my mind. So these are the things I said to him. And I felt a whoosh of air. And I took that as permission. And I could feel an okay, a little shift in the room. Now, I had never seen anyone in acute kidney failure. So he was completely, his body was bloated, and he had a feeding tube. He had the ventilator tube. He had a central line in his neck. He had the catheter bag that was bone dry. He had all these tubes and IVs. He had had blood transfusions, so many things to just keep him alive. But I took his hand, very careful not to dislodge any IV lines here, and he had a pulse oximeter on, all these medical things. And all I heard was just the breathing machine and its rhythm. So I took his hand and I said a prayer out loud. And the prayer that I used was to just give thanks to what I believed was a miracle working God, and that to thank him for this time together, and to let him know that he was loved. And if he had unfinished business and wanted to come back, then we would trust that God would help him to heal and do that. But if he was done, it would be okay. He could go in the light. And I could feel a sense of feelings from him too, Vera, like this sense of shame and discomfort. And he was struggling spiritually with where he was, and I could feel it. And I said, there's nothing you could ever do that God wouldn't love you. And it's okay if you want to go, just go in peace if you want to go. But if you want me to do this work, I'm going to do it. So I did about 20 minutes of Reiki, very light Reiki work. I was not feeling much energy from him, and I honestly didn't know if he was going to survive. And having had the experience of being out of my body before, I could sense that he wasn't quite in his body. He was hovering, having been in this coma now for weeks, and at near death at this point. So I don't, to this day, I don't know why I said it, but I told him, I said, I felt a sense of connection to him in spite of all of this. And I told him, I said, I don't know why I'm going to say this, but I am. If you decide that you want to stick around, I will promise you this. I will come back and I will help you see this through if you would like that. So I will make you another promise. If you are here tomorrow, I will be back. So that's what happened. That was the promise I made. And I was getting ready to leave. I did my closing prayer. I was still holding his hand. And then as I moved to take my hand away, again, he had no grip because he was in this unresponsive coma. I couldn't take my hand away. It was almost as though it was fused to his. And I realized his spirit was reaching back. And that's when I knew something had happened. A contact point had been made. Well, he did survive that night, and I came back, and I continued to come back for several days. And here's the experience that we had, that led up to what this encounter was. So when I came into his room, I was doing the same thing. He had begun to improve. He was showing a slight urine production, which was good. Kidneys, when they're destroyed with these scar tissues and granulomas, do not regenerate. And so they had said if he even survived this, he would need permanent dialysis. And if he were, the prognosis would be poor no matter what. He would never be eligible for a transplant list, nothing. But there was a little bit of activity. So that's when they said, sometimes a little bit of activity can come back. So that was an encouraging sign since it had been dry a couple days before. So as I said my opening prayer with him, this is what happened. Next thing I know, I'm not in my body. My consciousness has shifted to another place. And in that other place, I am in that place of love like I was when I had my drowning incident as a child. But this is so much more than that. This is the best way. It took me years to find words and they still fail me, but it was like being in billions of dots of white light. And I call it liquid love, even though it's not wet texturally. I mean, there aren't any words to really describe that. And there was David. David was floating in this love, ready to go. And there he was. And there I was. And I was with him while he's having his near death encounter. And I'm sharing in this man who is dying, but we are together in this most incredible, incredible, unconditional, everything, every time of love in this I called forever time. It's timeless. There's no sense of time. And there I was with him, and my heart opened completely. I was like, I know this man. I've always known him. I love him. And but he's a complete stranger to me. I'm just knowing these things. And I knew things about him. There was no way I could know. I just knew he was my soulmate, for lack of a better term. And the love was so huge. But again, it's not romantic like love, like we talk about it. It's just the most incredible love of the universe. And there he was in it. And the love was so huge that if he decided to go on, there's no selfishness here. It was like, well, whatever is going to be good for him is okay. But I know him, I know his spirit. And that's why I was there. That's why I came to be in this moment with this stranger who now was someone that my soul loved. And talk about following a path of destiny. But then I can't tell you how long I was in this conscious place with him where he hovered near his death. But in a moment, I'm back at his bedside. He's still unconscious. I'm still holding his hand. He's still hanging on. He'd not crossed. And so I'm totally in shock at this point. I'm looking down at this man that I don't know, feeling like he's my soulmate. And now I'm back in my human self, and my human self is totally unnerved. I don't know what to make of this. I'm not looking for a relationship. I'm busy with school, with my boys, with my life. This would not be somebody I'd want to be with. I mean, I don't know him. But yet something happened, and I just could, it was too jarring. So only thing I knew to do was just trust my faith that I was here for a minute, for this time, that this experience that I didn't have a name for was so profound, and that I owed this man something, no matter what, and I needed to keep coming back. So I did. I continued to come back twice a day over this 12-day period. And during that time, we had even more unusual experiences that I had never encountered as a healer or even just a person in life. I'd had lots of unusual experiences, being a very sensitive and aware, and I would use the term multidimensional because I had learned to walk in both worlds, I suppose, fairly, if not comfortably, at least I could manage. But there's we had another experience in which his kidneys with his kidneys. Do you want me to talk about that, or do you have any other questions at this point?
I have so many questions, Scarlett, but there's nothing more interesting than to hear how your story continued. And please keep going at this point. It's so interesting.
Okay, thank you. Well, um, as I continue to work with him, again, as I'm trying to point out, I have the capacity to see outside of my body and to be out of my body, to perceive out of my body. So I contribute that or attribute it to my near-death encounter at 4 years old. So what happened next with his kidneys as he began to improve as I worked with him? The nurses said, well, he needs help with his kidneys because they're just not going to ever regenerate. And I said, well, we don't know. I mean, and I was joking with them, and they're being very respectful at this point because he not only had survived but was showing recovery. And so I was at home in bed, and I was getting ready to go to sleep, and that kind of twilight space between sleep and full sleep, and you're just getting ready to fall asleep. I had a shift in my consciousness this time again, but I felt like I was in his hospital room, and I was in the corner hovering there, much like I had been hovering at the pool when I drowned. But what I saw or perceived was him there in the hospital room, which I was very familiar with. But I saw four very tall, what I perceived to be blue in color beings that looked like a healing team, like a medical team, there in his room. One was at the head, one was at the foot, and two on the side. And I was so surprised by this. I thought, well, maybe I'm dreaming. And then I saw what looked to be like a set of kidneys being holographic, bright light, images of kidneys descending into his body at the hands of this main healer. I called him. I call him the lead doctor because he looked like a doctor to me. And so they descended into David's body. And I thought, well, it looks almost like they're putting energy kidneys inside of his body. And I thought, well, this is interesting. And then the lead doctor looked up as though they perceived me and nodded their head at me. And I was so shocked by that. And then I'm back in bed. And now I'm wide awake and I'm wondering what in the world happened. And then I went to sleep almost instantly. So I got to the hospital the next day, not sure what to expect. And David's kidney function had started to ramp up even better. So I was bringing all sorts of things to the hospital, including music to help his brain function stay engaged. I had brought aromatherapy, essential oils like lavender and eucalyptus. I had brought omegas 3s and 6s to rub on his feet using some acupressure points. And I'd also brought tuning forks with me to kind of help with lift the vibrational frequency. So I brought my forks with me that day to work with his kidneys and lift the frequency. Now, if you're not familiar with energy work in that sense, it sounds a little different, but everything has an energy. And I should also point out, too, that in my prayers with him, I spoke specifically to him, but also to his organs, because the body does have an intelligence. And using affirmative prayer, the power of words, when someone is in an unconscious state, that's why it's so important to do it right, well, and in a positive frame. We affirm health. We affirm healing. We state what we see as done. And that's one of the things I would do. I said, I see your kidneys as full and complete, completely functioning, every cell, tissue, organ system in your body completely functioning well and whole. And now that these teams have put in new kidneys for you, we're just going to increase their energetic frequency. And so that's what I said, and that's what we did. So the nephrologist at the hospital came in, and over the subsequent days, David's kidneys began to increase in function so exponentially that the doctors and nurses began to call him Miracle Boy. And that's what they named him because there was no explanation for how his kidneys were regaining such dramatic function. And they continued to improve to complete full functionality. We have all the medical records for this that show the scar tissue, the granulomas, and being there, and somehow now gone. And there's no medical explanation, which is why they were calling him Miracle Boy. He ended up making a full recovery. He did not have any brain injury. His lungs began to heal too. He everything. When he woke up,
Mhm.
he was still a stranger. That's when things were awkward
Yeah,
because we
Scarlett, I want to know everything about this moment. So, it was so fascinating to listen to you. And as far as I medically understand, it's normally not possible to have kidneys revive in that way, right?
do
So
not.
they truly called him the medical patient, or the miracle patient, rather, very much so. Well, I would like to know very slowly in detail, though we have had a long interview already, Scarlett, but it's so fascinating. Let me know exactly how was it when he woke up? Were you there? Did it happen without you? And how was it for him when you both met for the first time? And did you ever talk about this experience you have had?
Wow. Yes, there's so much. When he woke up, I was not there at that time, but
Hmm.
when he was in and out of consciousness, it wasn't just a wake up to full alert. He had to recover. But when I came to his room to do the healing work on the final day and saw he was fully awake, when he opened his eyes and I came into his room, he held out his arms to me. And and then I went over and just gave him a hug and I told him, I'm Scarlett. He said, I know you. And later he told me, he said he knew everything about me. He knew he loved me. He knew he was going to marry me. He knew all this when he wasn't even sure if he was going to still survive this experience. But I knew I loved him too, but he was a stranger. So I had to again enter, I'm Scarlett. And he's like, I know. And later he said he knew everything about me except my name, but he knew all of that. And he just knew everything. So and I offered to bring him some food that night if he would like it. And I came back and brought him some food. And he said that the doctors had still found some clots in his shoulder. And I said, would you like me to do some Reiki and some energy work with you now? So I felt a little awkward at this point because now he's awake and we're having a conversation. And he said, okay, yes, please. And so I did the energy work with him and he fell right out. He just went to sleep. He was going to be discharged the next day. This is again, this has been weeks now, the 2 weeks I've been working with him, and they kept him another week and had put him in a step down unit. So he'd been in there over 40 some days. And he was going to be discharged to the rehab clinic to help him regain his strength. And but it turned out that the next day they said he was doing so much better he did not have to go to the rehab clinic. He went home. So I continued to go over and see him and do some healing work with him. And at that point, I talked about what I had experienced with the I said, I had this experience with you and this just being in this place of love and healing. I said, I don't know what it means, except that you've had a miraculous healing that happened and it is unexplained. And I have to believe that you've been given a second chance for an incredible reason. And and maybe you're supposed to do something with healing and helping other people with this gift you've been given. Because I said, this is a miracle. And he was still healing. He was still very weak. He was leaning on a cane. It was, he still had a long road ahead when you're that devastatingly ill. So, but he said he just knew that there had been so many things that happened that he just knew that it was going to be a long journey, as he knew, but he said, I don't know what's ahead, but I know that we're going to be together. And I said, well, what do you mean together? And he said, this was again, as the conversations continued, he said, I'm going to marry you. We're going to get married. And I'm, I'm like, I don't think so, Um, I just don't see how this is going to happen. There were a lot of things going on in both our lives that I just didn't see how this could possibly happen. And again, teaching the class too. I mean, he had so much. He was in the middle of a divorce at that time, and I was like, you've got too much to deal with here. He had major medical debts. He was very ill. He said, I know all these things, but I still know I'm supposed to be with you. And and he, at that time, we weren't talking so much about what he experienced, if he had a conscious memory of what I had
Mhm.
experienced.
Mhm.
But later he said, here's what I know. He said, because of the medications he was on and being in the coma state, he didn't have the conscious clarity recall. He said, I have a soul spirit memory. He said, because I know I know this happened. He said, because I woke up knowing everything. He said, I met you. I knew you when there was no way I could have known you any other way. He said, I knew everything about you. Again, knew I loved you, knew I was going to marry you. And I just knew you were my soulmate. And I said, oh, okay, so you have the spirit memory. I get it. Because cognition can, I was fully conscious, you was not. So I understood that. And he turned out to be right. And so 6 months later, we were married after he got out of the hospital, 6 months. And that was 19 years ago. This June 30th will be our 19th year anniversary. This whole medical ordeal happened in the fall of 2005. So we're in our 20th year of this, of being together. He not only has our relationship and stood the test of time and our love has endured, there's no doubt in my mind that we were and are soulmates. It doesn't mean that life is easy or perfect, but what it means is we were destined to be together and we honored that destiny and that gift. And so we've had these nearly 20 years together. So grateful for it. And so we've devoted a lot of our lives and our time to helping people as we can, sharing our story to give people hope and inspiration. Not to say we're experts in anything, but that we had an experience. And because, as you've heard me say, I believe that language matters and giving people names for things so that they can help get their a frame of reference is useful. So when I was trying to identify or come up with a name for what had we'd experienced when I was looking at the literature, well, I thought, well, David was having a near-death experience. I was sharing in that. But he didn't die. And that's the difference between a shared death experience versus near death, which is solo. They don't talk about people being with you necessarily in that, but that can happen. But in a shared death experience, it's not unusual for people to go part of the way with someone who's dying, but the dying person completes the journey and the person comes back. There
Yeah.
may or may not be a connection. People have reported just being caregivers, so not necessarily loving the person. Then maybe they do, but the person dies and completes the journey.
Mhm.
David, because he was near death, and I was there with him at that point where he was making the decision to come back or not, or to go on, he did not complete the death process. In fact, he came back. So I struggled with what to call it, and I came up with the term shared near death experience.
Mhm. Mhm.
So to classify it a little more closely in my mind and to make sense of it in a way that I thought might be useful for other people who might have had a similar experience. Now, what's unusual, this is how I met my soulmates in a near death experience. I have not to this day heard another story like that, although I have heard stories of people meeting a soulmate out of body experiences in dreams, things like that, but never in a near death or shared near death encounter. But I am hearing more experiences now, people having shared near death where the person does come back and the other person's not near death. And so I feel like it's important to use this term and to go forward with it. and acknowledge it as perhaps something that would be useful to add to the literature and to the body of near-death studies, because it's evolving, it's complex, and these types of experiences will probably continue to go forward as they do. You hear about it years ago, you heard some cases of near death experiences. Now you hear them all the time because we've given permission for people to speak about these things. And that was part of my goal too, Vera, in sharing our story. One, it was just so complex and so spiritually profound. But also, I don't feel that we were special necessarily. I feel that we had a miraculous gift given to us. And I do feel that a lot of the healing techniques that I use with David could be useful to other people in hospital settings. The combination of affirmative prayer with other modalities. I'd like to see how we can help people more to survive catastrophic things. I'd also like to see if maybe we can work with people in a coma situation and understand that their spirits are maybe hovering around, and we can talk, we can communicate. There's ways to communicate non-verbally through consciousness, and or just let people know you love them. Touch is so important.
Scarlett, I have one second to last question. It is that in the literature and when people talk about having experienced a near-death experience, they usually feel what you have told us you felt after your first NDE, namely that they lose their fear of death and also often their view on life changes. Has that been the same for David as well?
Yes, he is not afraid to die at all because he knows. He says, "I remember being in the love." He said, "I remember just floating in the love."
Mhm.
So he has taught me so many things about just uh, he doesn't get upset about things. He's just a very easygoing person, and he's a sunny person. And he's like, every day is a gift. And I'll say this too. The prognosis for people who had what he had, he's in remission now, but he did have a flare back in 2019, and we were concerned about that. But his kidneys are still fine, and he was able to get through it. The prognosis is generally 8 years.
Mhm.
Particularly the severity of what he had. First of all, it was not even supposed to be survivable with the combination of things, but any one thing could have taken him on, but the combination was so huge. But he survived all of that. And now we're going to 20 years, way past the prognosis. So, and we are both very serious about being in recovery together. The 12 steps we use in our daily life, we believe that that is a way to give back. People struggle with so many things, and and it's up to us to offer a hand of spiritual care to everybody that we come in contact with as best we can. So that's one of the things we do to give back, and we understand that this gift of life that we've been given is a blessing. It could go tomorrow. We don't know. It is a one day at a time understanding. But knowing that while we are here on this earth, we have a responsibility, particularly now when our world is in such turbulence. I feel it's even more important to speak out about how important love is and how we're going to share this human experience in this lifetime, and with the world, about understanding that we are all connected, and we have to love one another if we want to make this world a better place. And so that's one of the reasons, Vera, why even after 20 years I've chosen to continue to speak out about this. David and I both had long careers in financial services as professionals. Certainly talking about these topics, people can be skeptical, which is perfectly fine, and that's why I wrote the book, so that to help people understand what happened. We were on a TV show, The Unexplained, here, and it's aired worldwide with William Shatner on the first season, and they focused on the blue beings, which was fine, but my main takeaway is I try to explain to people I'm not and do not consider myself to be a great healer. That's not it. the creator of this universe is the healer, and the person is the one who gets to make the choice. Um, if anything, I'm a facilitator, but I also believe that what I did can be done by anybody, and I would like to see people maybe open their minds a little bit more when they're dealing with people who are at death's door or sick or just needing a helping hand. I think if we could bring a little bit more love and grace, and if my sharing of our experience can help people realize there's something greater than ourselves, and that force is love and it is accessible. I feel that that is the real message, and that miracles can and do happen. And I'd like to see them taken out of the realm of miracle to the realm of our normal. And I think we can do that if we're a little more systematic about giving language to things and approaching it in an intelligent, thoughtful, scientific way. I believe in science, and I want to see what we can do to help people better.
Scarlett, this has been so fascinating. I have one last question for
Oh,
you. And I understand that your husband, David, also created a painting of what he experienced. And when we talked previously, I was allowed to see it. Would you want to share it once more?
I would. It's downstairs, however.
Can you take us with your laptop, or is that
I
not
can.
possible?
If will that make your reader,
Well,
your
only
viewers?
if it's okay.
It's okay. Hold on one second. I will be walking down the stairs. How's
Super.
that?
So
Okay.
far, I can still see you. It's still going fine.
Now look at my messy bookshelves.
We're not looking at anything.
David still says that it's hard for him to verbally describe what he experienced. So he painted this painting that he calls the portal. Let's see if you can see it. Move
Yeah,
my
Scarlett, I can see it. It's so beautiful. And as previously, when we talked previously, I'll also show by Vincent Hensley. He also drew what he saw, and I just
That's
wanted to show.
amazing. Let's see.
Yeah,
You can come in a little closer. Yeah, to see they both have that core.
exactly. And they both have similar colors. Look at that.
Yep.
So,
Yep.
Scarlett, thanks so much for sharing also this image. Is there a chance to say hi to David for a second, or is he busy working somewhere?
Well, he's working in his office today. Let me see if
Is it possible to knock on the door, or is that not
I
acceptable?
will. I don't think he's necessarily camera ready, as he would say, but David is not, he's just so easygoing. I'm sure he
That
would
would be
prefer to be on,
wonderful.
what would you call, all dressed up, but let me see if he'll be willing to.
That
Hold
is
on one
so kind of
second.
you, Scarlett.
Veer would like to say hello to you on camera. Would that be okay?
Is it okay, David? I don't
Well,
mean to intrude. I just want to have you in our last picture so that we can see
okay.
you as well.
Can you say hi, David?
Oh, David, it's so good to see you too. You both, you
Yes,
guys, to see you together. What a pleasure.
thank you. Well, I'm looking forward to seeing the whole talk.
Me too. So, Scarlett, thank you so much. David, thank you for being in the video for a moment.
Of
Scarlett, thank you
course.
so much for sharing your beautiful story. I will
Thank you.
now stop the recording for us. So, goodbye, you both.